Brian Herndon, you and I are professors here at John Brown University. I'm in the history department. You're in the Department of Education.
Yep.
And I wanted to talk with you on a particular topic that isn't specifically addressed in the novel The Giver, but when I read this passage in The Giver, I'm reminded of the topic that you and I will be discussing, and I'll mention what that topic is in a second. But this passage I'm thinking of comes in chapter 19, and the community that this book describes, the community that the Giver describes, has a problem, and the problem is a set of identical twins. And identical twins in this community are troublesome because it bothers people that two people look exactly alike.
Sure.
And so the community is going to fix this problem by releasing one of the twins, one of the newborn twins.
Mm-hmm.
And release is a euphemism for murder, basically. Going to get rid of him. And so this character Jonas, he's the lead character. He's a boy. And his father actually is in charge of releasing what they call the new child. So the babies are called new child. So my father's releasing a new child today, a twin. He has to select one and release the other. And Jonas is talking to the Giver, right? The character in the story who holds all of the knowledge of the past, and the Giver's in the process of passing this on to Jonas. And when the Giver heard that one of these twins was going to be released, the Giver's face took on a solemn look. And he said, "I wish they wouldn't do that." And then Jonas chuckled and said, "Well, they can't have two identical people around. I think how confusing it would be, right? So confusing to have identical people around." So anyway, they go on, the author goes on to describe what happens. One of the babies is weighed at 6 pounds. The other baby is weighed at 5 pounds, 10 ounces. And so the one that weighs less is designated for release. So now I'm reading, "The father turned and opened a cupboard. He took out a syringe and a small bottle. Very carefully, he inserted the needle into the bottle and began to fill the syringe with a clear liquid. To Jonas's surprise, his father began very carefully to direct the needle into the top of new child's forehead, puncturing the place where the fragile skin pulsed. The newborn squirmed and wailed faintly." Skip a little bit. As Jonas continued to watch, the new child, no longer crying, moved his arms and legs in a jerking motion. Then he went limp. His head fell to the side, his eyes half open. Then he was still. His father tidied the room, then picked up a small carton that lay waiting on the floor, set it on the bed, lifted the limp body into it. He placed the lid on tightly, and then effectively off the carton with the body in it goes into disposal. "Bye-bye, little guy," Jonas heard his father say before he left the room, and then the screen went blank. So it's a very disconcerting passage because there are things about this community that are kind of weird and kind of a little unsettling, but on the other hand, it kind of seems like a nice place. Everybody's very polite and no one wants to hurt each other's feelings, but yet these troublesome people are gotten rid of. We don't need troublesome people who confuse us by looking identical. Early in the story, we have someone who's troublesome because he takes a wrong turn and flies over the community and makes people feel anxious, so he needs to be released, etc. We just can't deal with troublesome people. Now let's come to what I want to hear from you about.
Sure.
And that is that there's a country that was always at the top of my list that I wanted to visit. There were two countries I always said I wanted to visit. One was Vietnam and the other was Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've been to Vietnam 3 times by this point, but I've crossed Iceland off my list because I've discovered that Iceland has almost completely succeeded in the elimination of human beings with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
And you have a son with Down syndrome. And his
I do.
Nate.
You're right.
How old is Nate?
Nate's 11 years old.
So let me ask you this. When I think of, the word genocide, right, and its literal meaning, I think you've got a Greek word in there and a Latin verb mixed up. But I think the literal meaning of genocide is the elimination of a certain class, right? The elimination of a certain class of humans.
Right.
And when I look at the numbers from Iceland, effectively 100%, Denmark 98%, the United Kingdom 90%, France 77%, the United States 67%. It occurs to me that we've got the technical definition of genocide playing out in these countries, that we have a class of human life associated with Down syndrome that is in the process of being eliminated. So first question for you, do you agree that, what is your feeling about that? Do you think that is the right word to apply to this situation?
I've not thought of it that way, but I do, as you kind of define it that way, they are eliminating a group of people based on certain characteristics. And I think that's an accurate use of that word in this case. Absolutely.
Did you know that Nate was Down syndrome before he was born?
We did not. We actually, my wife, so Nate, let's see, our firstborn son was our 5th pregnancy. My wife had 4 miscarriages prior to our first child being born, and she has a high-risk pregnancies because she has a blood clotting disorder. So I'm telling you this whole background so you can understand. So she has a blood clotting disorder, which means that she was monitored a lot throughout every pregnancy. And so Nate was our third-born son, our third-born child, and she was monitored constantly. Had several ultrasounds, lots of stress tests. We didn't have any elective testing done for genetic defects, but for most pregnancies, my understanding is they measure the bridge of the nose and then the skin on the back of the neck. And those are general markers for Down syndrome, not always. And everything about him came back perfectly normal. He also was born with a heart defect, which is pretty common for kids with Down syndrome.
Right.
And his heart in utero looked perfect. And so there was no reason to suspect that that there was anything different about him. The only thing, oddly enough, that we can look back at all the films and see is he was constantly frowning. And we thought, is this just a sad child? Like, what's wrong with him?
You mean in utero or?
Utero, yeah. His mouth was always downturned. And now that we know more about Down syndrome, it's the lack of muscle tone, the low muscle tone, which almost all people with Down syndrome experience. And so he just didn't have the muscle to hold the mouth upright. But that's the only indication we had. So we were completely surprised.
So let me ask you to do something that, isn't really possible. And that is, try to return to the Brian. What year is he born?
He was born in 2008.
So, when Nate had not yet been born, so you're expecting him, so go back to that place in your life. And let's say that you had discovered that he was Down syndrome, if that's the right way of putting it. At that stage in your life, what difference do you think it would have made?
It would not, for us, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. We don't believe that abortion is the right choice. And so it would not have made any difference for us. I think, honestly, it probably would have freaked us out a little bit more because we would have gone to Dr. Google and looked up everything about Down syndrome and probably been very worried and scared. And I think God knew that about us and said, I'm not going to let you know this ahead of time. I'm going to let you experience it as it unfolds.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was a blessing that we did not know, because my wife and I both would have probably worried ourselves sick about it.
Yeah.
And honestly, like in thinking about it, it's interesting that you said that, Preston, just as far as, go back to before he was born, because, when he was born, there's a measure of grief that all parents experience when they have a child that is not what they think they're going to have.
Yeah.
And that's completely appropriate. It's completely appropriate.
Sure.
But I remember at the time going back and thinking, so he was actually born on my birthday.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's kind of a cool thing. But going back, and I remember thinking for a very long time that on July 28th, 2008, he did not have Down syndrome. But on July 29th, 2008, he did. And I think that was just kind of my way of dealing with it, because for 10 months, he did not have Down syndrome, although he did,
Yeah, sure. I hear you.
But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have made a difference for us, but it certainly would have made us worry.
Yeah. Well, and so, let me pick up on just a word and a couple phrases. You just used the word worry, used the phrase avoiding grief, used the phrase dealing with it, all of which conveys, a sense of hardship and trouble and adding more stress to an already stressful life, which presumably is why, this decision is being made. Folks are saying, to use your words, I want to avoid the grief of this. I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
And so we make this choice. Now, looking back now, as you hear those phrases now, you said Nate was born in 2009.
2008.
2008.
Yep.
So he's he's actually approaching adolescence now. We're on the way. So you look back now, what do those phrases sound like now? Now that he's become such a basic part of your life, avoiding grief, dealing with it, worry, etc.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like I said, every parent has to go through a measure of grief, a measure of loss. And I say that because it's loss of what you expected versus what you actually get. And all the feelings, and I tell people all the time, all the feelings you're experiencing are normal. They're fine.
Yeah.
They're appropriate. But when I think now, I think he is such a great kid, and he is such a blessing to our life that to think about loss and our son, it doesn't even make sense to me. To think about grief, it doesn't make sense. I remember at one point thinking that my older son, we had a boy and then a girl, and then our son Nate, and then we have a fourth child, a girl, so boy, girl, boy, girl. But I remember thinking that our son didn't get the little brother he was supposed to have. And now I see them play together and I see them interact, and I think he got exactly what he needed. And they're so good together. So the terms loss and grief, they're not even part of our vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because Nate truly, he's just part of our family, and we treat him as such. We don't, he obviously needs to be treated differently to some degree because he has disabilities, but as much as we can, we try to treat him as we would our other kids.
Yeah.
And he's just a part of our family.
One of the things that kind of mystifies me about this, and I, you obviously know a lot more about this than I do, but my sense is that among folks with Down syndrome, you do have a range of ability, kind of when I worked in mental health facilities, I don't know if these terms are still used, but we would use, high functioning, low functioning. I don't know if that's still used or not. But in any event, you know what I'm getting at. Yeah. And so I know that there will be a range of disability. Mm-hmm. But, every interaction I've had with Down syndrome folks, including one at my church, has always been very pleasant, Mm-hmm. As a class of humans, my observation is that they're pretty nice people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've never, a person with Down syndrome has never given me the finger. A person with Down syndrome has never written me a nasty email.
Right.
Person with Down syndrome has never ruined my day. I don't, if we're going to select a class of humans, to say, there's no class of humans that I think we should say, oh, this class of humans should not
Right.
exist. But I'm just,
Right.
it puzzles me just almost at a philosophical level. Why
Right.
would this class be the one
I think,
selected for elimination? Because,
yeah,
do you get you get where I'm coming from?
I do. And so there's a couple of points there I want to address.
Yeah.
One, I think that people with Down syndrome, you're right, there's such a range of ability.
Yeah.
Our son, I would classify him as a high functioning, label, though that those phrases are typically, we're kind of moving away from those a little bit in the world of disability, but he's very verbal. He's in regular education almost all of his day.
Wow.
So he's a really just, very high functioning kid.
Yeah.
And I would also say that there is the idea, stereotype, if you will, that people with Down syndrome are happy all the time, or are always nice people, and I would say generally that's the case. But I will also say that they do experience a range of emotions like everybody else. My son, I'll be honest with you, he has given the finger to his teachers at school.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know where he learned it, because we do not promote that in our home. I think he's learned it from some of the other fifth grade boys, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah.
The joys of full inclusion.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really understand exactly what it means. He just knows it gets everyone all riled up, and he thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
But, really and truly, he's more, so one of the phrases we like to use is more alike than different. And he truly is. He is more alike than different. He has to, he has to do chores just like the rest of our kids. He has to make his bed and brush his teeth and take his shower, and he has to make his own breakfast in the morning just like everyone else. Get his clothes on, get ready for school. Now, of course, he needs some help sometimes. He still can't tie his shoes, and button and zipping pants are a little harder. So there are some things that we have to do for him still. Now, I will say that there are people with Down syndrome that are nonverbal, and that does make life harder. And there are people with Down syndrome who do require a lot more support and care.
Sure.
And so kind of leading to your last point there, Preston, was that I think some of the fear is the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're going to get. Kind of like the Forrest Gump box of chocolates thing. You don't know what you're going to get. But you don't know what you're going to get with any child. We didn't know with any of our children what we were going to get. And even though they're 15, 13, 11, and 8, we still don't know what kind of adults they're going to be, and so to eliminate a group of people because there's fear, you just might as well eliminate all the people, it doesn't even make sense, because to eliminate because you're afraid of the unknown. Well, every child is unknown because they're individuals who have their own minds and their own thinking and things like that. So
this is more of a sociological question, but how do you think this is possible? It does involve the topic of abortion, and so that does make it more difficult. There's no question about that. It involves the question of abortion, so that makes it much more difficult. But in any other case, the knowing, willful elimination of a certain class of human life. We have actually witnessed attempts to do this in the 20th century, and the universal response is that's bad. Trying to get rid of all the Jews in Europe is bad.
Right.
One tribal identity trying to eliminate another tribal identity, that's bad, and this should not happen. But in this case, we do have something that I think does fit the technical definition of genocide, and you just don't hear about it very much, and it's taking place in societies that we consider highly organized, highly decent. I mean, I've never been to Iceland, and I won't go now. I've crossed it off my list because of this. Right. But I do know a bit about Denmark. It seems like, on the whole, a nice country. That's why I connect it to The Giver, because, the community described in The Giver in some ways seems so peaceful and nice. But yet there's this insidious wickedness taking place beneath the surface in a way. And I wonder if it's something like that. Go ahead and respond, just whatever thoughts you have.
Yeah, so what came to mind when you first started saying that was that yes, we live in a quote-unquote nice community, a nice society, where we value human life. Obviously we're in a world right now where we have disrupted all economies throughout the world so that we can preserve human life.
Yeah. The coronavirus, as you're talking about, the coronavirus.
Right, the virus, right? Why I'm sitting on my back porch right now and not sitting with you face to face.
Right.
But we also have to consider that in those societies, and in society as a whole, or just the world as a whole, I think, we still marginalize people. We still look at people as other. We still look at people as less than. And people with disabilities. So you've tapped into something here. I might not stop talking.
Go for it.
But we have people with disabilities are the most are the largest minority that is still legally segregated from society. And we do it starting when they start school. We do it when they're in preschool, because we say, oh, they have a disability, they can't be around their non-disabled peers. They have to be in a special classroom and get special instruction with special teachers. And our argument with our son is that he's not going to live in a special home and go to a special job and be around special people when he's an adult, so he doesn't need to be doing these things when he's a kid. He's going to live in society and be a meaningful member of society and a contributing member of society. And so we have pushed for him from day one to be educated with his non-disabled peers. But that is not how people feel on the whole. And so that's why you see, especially in the world of special education, you see kids with intellectual disabilities and kids with autism are overwhelmingly still educated in segregated settings away from their non-disabled peers. And I would challenge anyone listening to this, to think back to their school days and ask themselves, do you remember seeing any people with disabilities in your regular education classrooms? And most people would probably say no, not very often.
Yeah.
And so I think to some degree we don't, we still see people as other and different, and we don't value their lives as much as perhaps or as we should. So I think that might be why some of this is happening, because if we eliminate that quote problem, then we don't have to worry about putting resources into supporting people as they get older.
Do you think that let me ask you the question, and then I'll sort of tell you what's kind of behind it. Do you think that by segregating folks with these kinds of disabilities from the rest of us are losing an opportunity to learn really important stuff? Actually, I don't need to give you any more. I mean, do you think that we're actually robbing ourselves of really great opportunities?
We are, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we've pushed with every school district we've been a part of that our son be in regular education classes, because at some point, the people, his peers, are going to be the ones hiring. They're going to be the bosses, the managers, things like that. And he's going to apply for a job. And if the person who's interviewing him has never been around disability and is uncomfortable with disability, chances are really, really good that my son will not get employed. In fact, kids with disabilities, I think 80% of them are unemployed. And so I don't remember. Oh, so losing out. So my son being in a regular education classroom is as much for him as it is for the other kids. Because our hopes is that we normalize disability and we make it okay. Because my idea is that we are all one car accident away from disability, and so we need to normalize it as much as we can, so that everyone benefits.
You know, as I was listening to you, I was remembering when I was in 6th grade, I ditched school for 2 weeks straight, and it just, you know, just the way things went, my parents left before I went to school, and then for 2 weeks I just decided to stay home. And it took 2 weeks for the school to finally call my parents to say, you know, where's Preston? Right. Yeah, but you know the way the teacher dealt with it is that we actually did have a kid in the class. This was 6th grade. We had a kid in the class who had some sort of learning disability. It wasn't Down syndrome, it was something else. And the way the teacher dealt with it was that he made me that kid's tutor. Right? Okay. And in the process, he and I became friends. And I learned a lot. You know, that was actually my first teaching gig. That was my first teaching gig. Yeah. And I always look back and thought, now that didn't stop me from ditching. I would go through spurts. So 7th grade I went to school, then 8th grade I ditched a lot, and 9th I went, and then 10th grade I ditched a lot, and it would be off and on. So it didn't stop me from my ditching career, but it was my first teaching gig. And it's very important. That was a case where this guy was with the rest of us. He needed some extra help. And the teacher gave me that job to be his mentor. That was my first teaching gig. It's very important. Yeah, it was a very important thing. And I like that idea, and I hope it takes hold, that not only are we robbing those kids of things such as you've described, but we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to learn from them. Absolutely. And I feel like my son has so much to teach other people. I mean, he has taught me so much about slowing down and just kind of enjoying things a little bit more. Yeah. I'm a fast-paced person. I like to go. And I will tell you, probably 9 times out of 10, having someone with Down syndrome in your life will slow you down. Because inevitably you are still tying shoes, or you are still looking for shoes because who knows where they've been placed. You know, I mean, you just slow down, and he teaches me to laugh and to be silly, and to look at things differently, and really and truly, he has helped me, I think, as a teacher as well, and a teacher of teachers, to be able to explain things so much better, because I have to think through for him how to explain things in ways that make sense. And he asks very complicated questions sometimes. I mean, he loves to talk about God and Jesus and why, you know, Jesus had to die on the cross, and so we have lots of discussions around those things, and for me to have to try to make it so that he can understand really makes me a better person. It makes me more thoughtful, more articulate, things like that. Yeah. Well, last thing, I mean, imagine that you're talking to you know, to a woman who's just been given word that the baby she's carrying has Down syndrome. And, you know, and then along with that came counseling that, you know, she could not have the baby, that's an option. What would you say to her? Well,
I'll say one of the things that we were not, that was not said to us when we had our son was congratulations. Congratulations, you have a beautiful baby. Congratulations, you know, that this pregnancy seems to be going well, you know. And then I would say that there are a lot of choices that you can make for this child, for your future, and that that terminating this child's life, you know, it depends on who it is, I guess. But to me, like, terminating this child's life it should be your absolutely last option. And in my opinion, it shouldn't be an option. But there are so many families out there that would be willing to adopt. That life with Down syndrome is actually wonderful and beautiful. And that bringing a child with Down syndrome into this world will enhance your life in ways that you cannot possibly even imagine. And so, yeah, I think those might be things I would say. I would also say, and some people don't like this, but I really like it. There is a poem out there called, I think it's called Welcome to Holland. And it's odd that you say that Denmark is working toward eliminating people with Down syndrome, because Welcome to Holland is actually a beautiful poem, and it's a story about this person who was on a plane or some way. Their plans were to go to Italy, and their plane touches down and it says, you know, unfortunately, we're not going to make it to Italy today or ever, but we are going to be in Holland, and you're going to be stuck here. And so you grieve the fact that you didn't get to go to Italy, but you know what? Holland's a really beautiful place, and there's a lot of wonderful things there. And so let's embrace Holland. And so I would probably give someone that poem and say, you know what? Holland's pretty awesome, and Down syndrome is pretty awesome too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Brian, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been great talking with you. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Yep.
All right.
Glad to do it.